I'll be touching upon an experience that goes into pretty extensive detail of a tense situation. I will be speaking on stuff that may trigger people if they are generally sensitive. So if what I'm talking about is something that triggers you, then click off. If not, then thank you for watching or listening. The monetization of this and the last video is turned off. But with that, let me talk about my first panic attack after 3 years of being clean. So what's going on here? The last panic attack I had was when I was around 19 years old. I'm now 22. I thought after that point, things would get better. And to be honest, things did get better. I surrounded myself with people that I could trust and found it generally easier to speak about my experiences with other people. After my last panic attack, I tracked my progress on the app I Am Sober. It's basically an app where you can track everything you're trying to get clean from. And in my case, this was my panic attacks. The one attack I had 3 years ago was actually kind of dumb looking back on it. I had just started at a new job that was a part of my school because I studied in a field where you can actually go to work instead of going to school most days. On my way to the new job, I couldn't find where the place was, and since at this point I still wasn't good at coping with my attacks, I just completely shut down. Instead of instantly calling for help, I just decided to leave. But it was only after I had left the panic started to set in. Normally when I'm faced with a panic attack such as this, I face reactions such as insane dizziness, difficulty speaking and forming words, and very heavy breathing. As I was having the attack, my teacher called me to ask me where I was. This didn't really help that much because at this point I was kind of disorientated and I didn't really know what was real. So as my teacher was on the line, he tried explaining to me where the place was, but all I could think about was the intense reaction I was faced with, even though nothing was actually happening. I was not in any danger, nor was I at risk of dying. But when your mind makes up stuff and believes it's 100% real, it's hard to distinguish what's actually reality and not. I knew that I was in trouble for not going to work that day, and I didn't think rationally. I decided to tell my teacher that I don't think I can go to work, and I think because he had just listened to my voice being all shaky and discombobulated, he agreed to let me go home that day to rest. It took a whole hour before the panic started to fade away. I was still breathing heavily as I was walking home, and I was still shaking really bad. I honestly don't have many memories of what happened after I came home. All I remember is that I crashed on my bed and slept for a while due to all the energy I'd used on the attack. But that was the attack that happened 3 years ago. So what about the one that happened recently? It was any other Monday. I woke up at 7 AM to get to work and left at 7:30 AM to get there early as I always do. I logged into my shift at work and finally got started. Things were going well at work. Not much to do there, but there was still a decent amount. I like distracting myself by doing a lot of stuff, meaning I'm occupied for the entire day without stopping. Afterwards, I had lunch and tried my best to socialize with my colleagues. That's when it suddenly happened. Instantly, I started having trouble breathing. I became incredibly dizzy and it was hard to stand upright. Instead of my previous reaction in which I just shut down and didn't call for help at all, this time, since I've developed new strategies to cope with such an attack, I called my supervisor as the attack was taking place. I told her, I believe I'm having an anxiety attack. I don't know what to do. As I was telling her this, I was breathing heavily and I started to become incredibly pale. She asked me to tell my boss what was happening, but as soon as I stepped out and tried finding him, I asked one of my colleagues as the attack was happening about where he was, and they just said he had just gone to his lunch break. I locked myself out of the shift with insanely shaky hands and very uncomfortable dizziness. I managed to walk myself to my car and called my supervisor once again. She advised me to listen to some music as they called my boss to tell them what was going on. This apparently was supposed to calm me down. I did as she said, and thankfully I had my headphones with me and turned on some music. As I was trying to calm down, I couldn't help but think, why is this happening now? I was doing so well. This will ruin all the progress I've done for the past 3 years. I also started to feel immense guilt for my co-workers because I had left work early. The music didn't seem to help calming me down. As I was still breathing heavily, I couldn't hold it in any longer and I started crying in my car. While this was happening, I texted my mom pretty much saying I was a failure, that I ruined everything and that I was sorry for letting her down. After what felt like forever, my supervisor called me back. She tried to say that they had called my boss and he now knows what happened. She started talking about how my boss was worried about me and wanted nothing more than to see me get better. My supervisor advised me not to drive because I wasn't fit to do that in the state. At this point, I could barely talk or form any type of sentence. She kept telling me what I was feeling wasn't actually because I was in any danger. What I was experiencing wasn't because it was real, but it was because my mind had convinced itself that it was. We probably spent an hour just talking about what happened. She also asked me if I even wanted to talk about it, even though I couldn't really form a coherent sentence. I just gave her an approving sound to let her know that I wanted to face this head on. I'd rather deal with my pain face to face instead of burying it. She kept talking about how this was happening probably due to immense pressure on myself, or even a buildup of suppressed emotions that I haven't dealt with. The more she talked about it, the calmer I eventually got. Even she noticed that I started to speak more and more clearly. After she just told me to go home and drive safely, and then my aunt gave me a call. My supervisor had told my aunt what happened, and my aunt wanted to come over and talk to me about it. She didn't know if I was a risk to myself or not, so she decided to come home from work early, which I asked her if it was okay, and I was afraid that she'd get in trouble for that. When I came home, I texted my supervisor telling her that I was safe and at home. After a little bit, my mother called me and said she would be leaving work early to come home with me. I wasn't actually sure if I fully trusted myself, so I told my mother I was thinking about locking my bedroom door, but I ended up being too exhausted to stand up and just wanted to wait for my aunt and my mother to arrive home. After a bit, my aunt finally came to my place, and it didn't take long for my mom to do the same. We started talking about what happened for a couple of hours, and it was then we actually started to untangle what the core issue was. As you may know, when I'm faced with pain like this, I face it head on and leave no room for any other arguments. I talked to my aunt and my mother, and they gave me some good insight as to what could have caused this. I started to connect what had been happening over the past few months, and the pattern became quite obvious. When I was at work, I would set goals on what to complete. I essentially had extremely high standards for myself when I was working. Now, setting goals for yourself obviously isn't a bad thing, but it becomes a problem when I, for example, don't reach the goal I set for myself. I then let that affect me deeply when I'm done at work. I'd feel like a failure and leave work dissatisfied with my progress. This will inevitably cause a lot of stress, which adds up very quickly. Stress shows up in different ways on people, and I figured out that my stress shows up delayed. Pretty much, it only shows up when there's a large buildup of it, and when it's released, I can most likely have an attack. I mean, literally prior to me having the attack, I'd leave work with a faint red irritation on my chin. I'd come home from work literally mentally exhausted and completely drained. Sometimes I'd need a couple of minutes just to breathe in and out in my car before I drive. It wasn't entirely uncommon for me either to have stress-related dreams right before work. Everything in my behavior was pointing towards me holding on to stress for an extended period of time without addressing it properly. There obviously can be infinite other factors that may have caused this attack to happen, but from what I've learned about myself and the research I've done, it all points to a buildup of stress that couldn't be contained any longer. If you're someone who's been struggling with panic or anxiety attacks, I want you to know that you're never alone in this. I have to remind myself that what happened to me isn't really a setback, even though my mind tries to convince me that it is. If this happens to you, then please don't let it weigh you down. Instead, let it motivate you to be more open about your experiences. Thank you so much for watching or listening, and please take care of yourselves.